from the Daily Mail. Las Vegas teens Jesus Ayala and Yasmir Keys laugh in court and give the finger to the family of police chief they filmed themselves mowing down and killing. You remember this video?
It's a horror.
That went viral? They're laughing in their car, filming it, and they ram this guy from behind, and they're in court and they're laughing about it. Dude, I'm sorry.
They're
Evil
just messing
exists.
around. They're they just don't care about
Like
anything or
all
anybody.
the way outside of the class, outside, as they were being walked out, basically still laughing.
Well, they were laughing just sitting there.
Wow.
I find, I don't know how you, I mean, I think it's important to be able to understand how people get to this point and how this happens. But I also think that and I think evil, of course, has always existed. I mean, you could go back to Genesis, like it's right there, you know, killing your brother because you're jealous or whatever, that happens. But I do think that we have neglected our, spiritual life in this country to a certain extent. I think that it's not a good thing that we have elevated atheism and that we have expected the, Judeo-Christian moral codes as exemplified by, primarily the 10 Commandments and the Gospel according to Matthew, the Beatitudes there. I think it's a problem that we have expected those things to survive in public life. We have expected the civil religion that maintains public society to survive while removing God entirely and while removing, the concept of a higher power that will hold you accountable and that will also not just hold you accountable, that will hold you accountable and provide you light and love, and communion with your fellow man. I think that that's a big problem. Like, this is a conversation I've been having with my son a great deal lately, who's studying for his confirmation next year. And definitely says to me things like, I don't know if I believe in God. And I'm like, okay, enjoy your CCD class because, we're teaching you this anyway. And I had, a very long period of toying with atheism myself until the void was just
too much.
The void was too much. I could no longer look into that void and step out into the world and look at the sun and be happy about it. So, but I think that as we have removed God and as we have removed spiritual feelings, we have eradicated them to the point where it's hard to find them. Like, how are the kids supposed to find God if they never even learn the word? I was talking to, and then I'm going to let you talk. No. I just have one more thing I was saying. I was at TPUSA something, not this past June, but the previous June, and I was on a panel with Carol Markowitz and Emma Jo Morris, and it was really fascinating. And we were talking about how to maintain, your religious traditions and your faith while you're living in essentially New York City, where we lived.
Yeah.
And a young woman got up and she said, most of us in my generation don't know anything. We don't know from God. We don't understand any of this. Instead, when we have a spiritual crisis, we think it's psychological and we go get therapy and we just end up with drugs. So how do you find God if God has been eradicated? And how do you maintain a moral center if there is nothing to ground it?
Yeah. Do you find that religion is in the time that you've been alive, have you found like the decrease in religion here in America to be one of the main calling cards for why society seems to be falling the way it has?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can remember when there was, and I think, Libby, you make a very important point. Everyone sort of agreed on the basics of ethical behavior. But the feeling was, well, we don't have to be so doctrinaire about religious faith. We can, you don't even really need to be religious to acknowledge that killing is bad and, stealing is bad. But it turns out that that's not true. It turns out that that's not true at all, because we see widespread justification of killing and we see stealing.
Both of those are both highly justified now in society.
Right. And this is something that I discussed, and in fact, I discussed it at length with our mutual friend on the Shamer cast.
Shimcast.
Shimcast.
After we met here when you were pretending to be sick, so you could skip work. It is extremely difficult because he's an Orthodox Catholic and I'm an Orthodox Jew, and we were talking about, we might all agree as a completely objective sociological observation that societies that do have religious faith are more stable, and there might be aspects of it. But what do you do if people have lost their faith? As a society, when as an entire
Inquisition
society, well, that didn't really necessarily work. I mean,
Oh, I was kidding.
no, I if it worked, then we would have to, but actually, remember the main issue with the Inquisition was identifying Jews who pretended to be converts. But you can't even really talk about orthodoxy anymore. In other words, we're in a post-orthodoxy world unless you live in a subculture, as I do, in which we have created our own governing mores, and it's not perfect and it's not entirely always consistent, but because of the extent of liberty that Americans are permitted, and most people in the West are permitted, we can do that. And we have our own internal governance systems and our own rabbinical courts for civil disputes. And again, everything doesn't click the way it necessarily ought to, but what can you do to an entire society that doesn't even have that feeling because Libby, you identified, you'd reached a point in your life when you said this, I'm going to paraphrase you now, this can't be what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
We're just an arbitrary fart of the universe. There must be meaning. There must be a reason, and there must be truth. And
there must be somewhere that love comes from, was also what I was thinking.
And you still had resonating in you a family tradition of where to look to recover the methodology and the language and the thinking of what the answers to these questions were. So my friend Yoram Hazony writes in his books about conservatism and national conservatism, it is a legitimate thing for people to look to the faith of their ancestors. People think, well, how do you know Judaism? If you would have been born a Hindu? I wasn't. I just know that the people that I respect and the tradition and the culture that I look to my ancestors toward, and I see people who were older than I, they are a product of a tradition that is entitled to a presumption of validity for me because I am myself also a product of that. Yeah. That's very hard for Americans to get onto because Americans have this admirable quality of questioning everything and being skeptical and show me state. I'm from Missouri, and it turns out that those are good exercises to participate in, but if you don't have a base at which you say, this is never permitted. And also, there's such a lack of understanding of basic theological concepts that have been treated at great length for thousands of years. And people go to college and they think they've got these really clever answers to great theological questions, and they don't. And they think it's really a good question. So you think God really cares whether you eat bacon or not? I do. And you know why? Because God has the capacity to care about everything at once. He's not limited like you are by trying to multitask. He's God. And it would be great if, there probably are people who do this. If people could could get a basic theological education and just understand if they want to be skeptics, what they're being skeptical of. But it's a real hard task.
What are the ramifications for defying God in Judaism?
In traditional Judaism, there are several kinds of punishments that are discussed in the Torah. One is that if you can be punished by an earthly court for knowingly violating God's law. Now, you can also, in the time of the temple, the great temple of Palestine in Jerusalem, that you would bring a sacrifice. You'd have to bring a sacrifice because that's laid out in the Bible as how you atone for a sin. You have to go through the trouble of buying an animal and having it, and it doesn't have to be a big old cow. It could be a bird. It could even just be meal if you're a poor person. You need to say to God, I'm making a donation. I am paying a penalty, and I want and you're gonna fine.
What if you don't?
If you don't, then all right. Your question really is
More spiritual, not physical.
afterlife, right? So you can be punished in this world, which is considered to be a good scenario. In other words, you would rather be punished in this world by afflictions than have your punishment await you in the next world, because there's no limitation to what suffering you can experience in the next world.
But is this the same notion of heaven and hell?
Essentially it is. I mean, there are, and there's a lot of, I will tell you that the traditional Jewish thinking on this as reflected in the Talmud, and this is going to get your live chat going because they love words like that. The rabbis are absolutely comfortable with the idea of reward and punishment in this world, in the next world. We also have the concept of that the dead will come back to life in the time of the Messiah. You can be deprived of the opportunity to be resurrected if you are guilty of certain kinds of sins, which would be that would be pretty bad. But then there's a soul. The soul is not the body. The soul is not you. It's not some it's not some magnetic force or something. It is a godly essence that is placed within you, and you can suffer in this world. You can suffer in the next world. Very much more complex stuff than people would think, and you find and it is reflected in Christianity. It's reflected certainly in the Catholic Church was founded by rabbinical students, and they knew what they were talking about.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.